All right, there's a certain form that we can put our matrices in, and that's called row echelon form. To be perfectly honest with you, it's a little outdated, not really useful. When we go to row reduced echelon form, a lot more useful. But for the sake of your homework, we're going to go over row echelon form as well. Row echelon form can be abbreviated as REF. And if you need to, pause the video and write these down. Okay, so hopefully you've paused that and wrote that down. So now I'm going to kind of explain to you what's going on in these. It's easier to look at this bigger one and then we can kind of see this one. But this one here, what you're looking for row echelon form is a diagonal of ones, and those are really important. You want a diagonal of one. And then everything below that diagonal in this little triangle here are zeros. So your diagonal of one, everything below are zeros, and then everything above it, they can be ones, they can be zeros, but there's some number, okay? This diagonal must be ones. This triangle below must be zeros. A through F essentially can be any number, including 0 or 1. So same thing on this one, just on a much smaller scale. You still have your diagonal of ones. And then we have everything below in this little triangle here are still zeros. A, B, and C are all numbers that could be a 0, could be 1. Okay, but this diagonal of ones have to be ones, and what's below that diagonal has to be a 0. So to kind of show you here, this matrix that we did in example 2 is really, really close to row echelon form. What is the one number that's out of place? Okay, hopefully so this -3. This diagonal needed to be ones. You have these two ones here, but that one's not. But you do have everything below are zeros. So this one was really close to being in row echelon form, where you had a diagonal of ones, everything below zeros, and then numbers all above that, okay? So that's what we're kind of looking for. Now, back in the day, you know what I'm saying? We had to take our augmented matrix and perform these row operations to get them into these forms here. Now, we're not going to be doing that because honestly, it's very time consuming and we have calculators. But you do need to know how to perform the row operations when they tell you to perform them. So the first row operation you can do is interchange any two rows. And you can see the notation here. You have your row 1, your row 2, and it is saying interchange your row 1 and your row 2. So now your second row becomes your first one. And your top row becomes your second row. And we are done. Now you can see why this would be useful. If I'm trying to get this matrix into this form here, I now have that leading number as a 1. And that's always where you wanted to start when you would do these row operations, is to get this top left-hand 1 into a 1, essentially. Okay, so if you just change these two rows, you can kind of check that off the list. The second thing you can do is replace a row by a non-zero multiple of that row. So here it tells you to take row 1 and multiply it by 1/5. Hopefully we understand this, but in case we don't, multiplying something by 1/5 is the same thing as dividing it by 5. So I'm just taking everything in that first row and dividing it by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. -10 divided by 5 is -2. 5 divided by 5 is 1. There's my bar. -20 divided by 5 is -4. Now, I don't have any instructions here on what to do with row 2 or 3, so those just carry over. So I'm just going to rewrite them. And now we are done. You can see on this one, dividing this first row by 5 gets me again to that top left-hand number to become a 1. I didn't have the option this time to switch any rows to get that 1 in that right place. So dividing that whole top row by 5 gets me to a 1 right here, which is again that first goal. Now, number 3 is a little bit more confusing. Replace a row by the sum of that row and a constant non-zero multiple of some other row. Okay, so you can see here they've already got that top corner into that 1. So check, that's done. Once that is done, the next step would be to get everything below that to be zeros. And so if we follow these instructions right here, we can do that. So here it tells me to take my row 1 and multiply it by -2. And I'm going to take that number and add it to my row 2. So -2 times 1 is -2. Add that to the row 2, and you're adding it to what's right below it to this 2 here, and we get a 0. Okay, so one more time, -2 times 1 is -2, and -2 plus 2 is 0. -2 times -3 is 6, and 6 plus -5 is -1. -2 times 2 is -4, plus 3 is -1, and -2 times -6 is 12, and 12 plus the -4 is 8. Okay, so what I did is I multiplied everything on that top by -2 and then added that number directly below it. So we're going to do that again right here. Pause the video and see if you can get row 3 correct, and then hit play and check your answers. Okay, so let's check your answers. I'm multiplying everything in that top row by 3 and then adding that number directly below to row 3 that's like right below it, right? So 3 times 1 is 3 plus -3 is 0. 3 times -3 is a -9, and -9 plus -6 is a -15. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 4 is 10, and 3 times -6 is -18, plus 6 is -12. Okay, rewind that if you need to see that again, but you're multiplying everything in that top by 3 and then adding that number to row 3 that's right below it. Now I have no instructions on what to do for row 1, and so it just carries over. So again, if I'm trying to get this into my row echelon form, it already started with the 1, and now I have my zeros right here below it.